How could a 2,600-year-old shipwreck contain a metal made using technology we only rediscovered in the 1700s? Because there is no evidence of furnaces or craftsmen able to achieve such a technological feat anywhere in the ancient world. How are these ingots related to Orichalcum, the legendary metal Plato said covered Atlantis' temples? Above all, why did one of our century's most shocking archaeological discoveries quickly fall into unexplained media and academic silence? Today we're discussing material evidence that challenges history, a journey through science, mystery, and lost knowledge. But before we begin, as we always do, we invite you to support our work by subscribing to the channel. For you, it's a simple gesture, but for us, it's essential. The sea doesn't preserve the sea. It hides, swallows ships, corrodes metals, shatters stories, and turns them into sand. For every treasure it seals in the mud of the seabed, there are 1,000 that are erased forever by its silent fury. But sometimes, after centuries of oblivion, the sea chooses to return a fragment, a message in a bottle sent from a forgotten era. In 2015, off the coast of Gela, in Sicily, the sea returned a message that no one was ready to read. Recovered from an ancient wreck, there were no amphorae or common ceramics. There was an impossible cargo that came from a past much deeper than those waters had ever revealed. About 300 meters from the shore, and less than 3 meters deep, lies the fragmented wreck of a very ancient ship, a merchant vessel dating back to around the 6th century before Christ, an archaic era when the routes of the Mediterranean were traveled by colonists, merchants, and sailors who traded wine, oil, metals, and ceramics. The site was located thanks to a combination of sonar surveys, exploratory dives, and systematic surveys conducted by the Superintendency of the Sea of the Sicily region, under the direction of archaeologist Sebastiano Tusa. But what emerges from that seabed is not an amphora or an anchor. They are metal ingots, heavy ingots, irregular, encrusted by centuries of marine sediments, but still recognizable. The color is unusual, a mix between oxidized copper and the sheen of ancient gold. At first, they believe it's bronze, the classic ancient alloy, but something seems off. The shape isn't the standard one for casting ingots, the weight is excessive, and the density is unusual. They analyze its composition, and the result is completely unexpected. The ingots are made of copper and zinc, with small percentages of other elements like lead, nickel, and iron. An artificial alloy obtained not by chance, but through a deliberate process, except that this alloy shouldn't have existed in the ancient world. And that's where the mystery begins. When the laboratories published the results of the metallurgical analyses, the surprise was clear. Those ingots were made of an alloy of copper and zinc, with proportions varying between 75 and 80% copper, and between 15 and 20% zinc, with minor traces of iron, nickel, and lead. So it was not a natural alloy, but a refined intentional product. The problem is that to obtain a similar alloy, especially one that contained zinc in those quantities, you need advanced thermal and chemical control. In fact, zinc is a metal with a very low boiling point. It evaporates at around 900 D, well before reaching the melting point of copper, which is around 1085 degrees. In other words, if in the 6th century before Christ they had simply mixed zinc ore with copper in a traditional furnace, the zinc would have evaporated into nothing without combining with anything. Of course, someone might argue that about 500 years later, the Romans produced a similar alloy that they called Orichalcum. They created it with an ingenious method, cementation, by heating copper with zinc or calamine so that it would absorb its vapors. However, it was an indirect, hard-to-control process, and the final alloy quality was often inconsistent. The consistent and homogeneous quality of the ingots from Gela, on the other hand, suggests a control over the process that seems almost modern, a quality that was extremely rare in the ancient world, and that would only become common with the advent of industrial metallurgy. The real question is not just who made those ingots before the Romans, but how such metallurgical knowledge existed in an era thought to lack these abilities, and why, despite later advances, that level of control seems to have disappeared for centuries. We have no clues. No ancient text mentions this technique, and no other Mediterranean archaeological site has produced similar alloys. Yet 39 ingots exist. They have been found, and they represent something that official history cannot explain. But perhaps the answer has not been lost. It is simply hidden in a different place, not in the archives of science, but in those of myth. Because for this impossible metal, myth has always had a name. Scientific analyses confirmed significant zinc content and a deliberate, uniform ingot composition. A sense of fear began to spread within the research team. An ancient word, almost unpronounceable in academic circles, a word that comes directly from myths, from philosophy, and from a single specific author, Plato. That word was Orichalcum. In ancient Greek, Orichalcum literally means mountain copper or shining copper. It's a metal that Plato mentions twice in Critias, one of his last dialogues, where he tells the story of the legendary Atlantis. According to Plato, the Atlanteans possessed a rare and precious alloy, shining like fire, more valuable than any other metal except gold. They used it to cover the walls of the temples, the columns, even the floors of the great sanctuary of Poseidon, and to mint coins.
Inside the temple, everything was covered with gold, except for the statues, whose walls and columns were covered with orichalcum that shone like fire.
But what exactly was orichalcum? For centuries, scholars have debated without reaching a conclusion. Some have interpreted it as a poetic variant of copper, while others have thought of it as an invented, symbolic alloy created by Platon to give substance to the myth. But the truth is that before 2015, no one had ever found anything that could be identified with certainty as orichalcum. The ingots from Gela, however, uncannily match Plato's description. And finally, they were found at sea on an ancient trade route between east and west. At this point, the word orichalcum is no longer just a mythical label, but a real possibility, so real that it embarrasses the academic world. Because if those ingots really are what they seem, then Atlantis might not be just a myth, and a material object encrusted with salt brought back to the surface becomes a concrete clue. There are myths that withstand time better than stone, stories that travel through millennia without breaking, without wearing out, as if they contain something that goes beyond a simple tale. Atlantis is one of those myths, one of the most powerful, one of the most unsettling, because it doesn't just evoke a lost civilization, it speaks to us of a knowledge that shouldn't have existed. Plato discusses this in the Timaeus and Critias, crediting Solon, who allegedly heard it from Sais priests in Egypt. He tells of an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, where an extraordinary power thrived. A civilization capable of building temples covered in precious metals, digging circular canals, and ruling vast and fertile lands, thanks to advanced knowledge. Why was orichalcum so valuable just after gold? Its physical properties, which we now know are those of high-quality brass, explain its exceptional resistance to corrosion. Selena would have made it a strategic material for a maritime power. Let's imagine ship hulls covered with this metal. Faster, more durable, immune to marine organisms, or crucial components like anchors, pumps, and nails capable of withstanding the sea for centuries. Not to mention its use in architecture, sheets of orichalcum protecting the walls of temples, shining like fire and almost eternal. It wasn't just a luxury, it was an absolute technological advantage, the perfect metal to dominate the sea and build for eternity. But then suddenly something happens. Atlantis is destroyed in a single day and a single night. swallowed by the sea. Modern historians have long interpreted this story as pure allegory, a political fable invented by Platon to criticize Athens of his time and to build an ideal model of a just city. Simply a pedagogical myth, nothing else. But not everyone agrees. Even in ancient times, some authors wondered whether Platon had drawn from a real memory, distorted by time, but based on actual events. In recent decades, new archaeological and paleoclimatic discoveries have led to growing acceptance, even beyond academia, of the idea that an advanced civilization may have existed before official history. Faced with the Gela ingots, a logic presents us with a brutal crossroads. Either we accept that in the 6th century before Christ, there existed a phantom foundry equipped with almost futuristic technology, or we completely change our perspective. If this foundry had existed, we would be faced with two insurmountable mysteries. The first is the manufacturing void. Those 39 ingots are not experiments. They are standardized production, raw material ready to be processed. But then where are the finished products? Where are the helmets, the statues, the jewelry made with this superior metal? In no site in the Mediterranean has even the slightest trace of contemporary artifacts made with this alloy ever been found. So is it possible that everything has been lost? The second is the technological paradox. When the Romans, 5 centuries later, began to produce orichalcum through cementation, the result was often less uniform, more variable in composition. But the ingots from Gela show a surprising homogeneity, a quality that, to be found regularly, would have to wait for modern foundries. No conventional explanation, neither chance nor some unknown exotic origin, can solve these two paradoxes. But if we change our perspective, everything starts to make sense. If we assume that the ship's cargo was not the result of contemporary production, but a discovery, a treasure already ancient at the time of the shipwreck, the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. In this scenario, there's no phantom foundry to find. There are no contemporary artifacts because the knowledge to create them had already been lost. The technological gap with the Romans is clear. They tried to reinvent what was already forgotten. The cargo from Gela thus becomes something much deeper than just a commodity. It becomes a fragment of a previous civilization, a legacy from the past, perhaps from the ruins of a forgotten temple or from a sacred site belonging to an invisible culture that possessed a science we have only just begun to understand. After the initial euphoria, the news about the Gela ingots quickly slipped into silence. The newspaper headlines faded, documentaries stopped at the first hypotheses, and the alleged copy was never mentioned again. And yet the paradox is there, in plain sight, at the Archaeological Museum of Gela, which any of us can visit. The ingots are still visible, guarded, preserved, and yet scientifically ignored. Plato spoke of Atlantis as a civilization destroyed 9,000 years before his time. That is about 11,500 years ago, a date that coincides remarkably with the end of the last ice age and with the mysterious event known as the Younger Dryas, a period of climatic upheavals, floods, and destruction on a global scale. For a long time, independent researchers and unaligned archaeologists have hypothesized that something significant was lost during that era, a civilization, a body of knowledge, a system of wisdom that shattered and then survived in fragments, legends, myths, and perhaps even in real objects. We may never discover a sunken city with concentric walls and golden temples. But maybe that's not necessary, because sometimes a fragment is enough. An impossible object in the wrong place, a metal that shouldn't exist, and when these fragments emerge, we can no longer pretend nothing happened. At this point, we're really curious to know your opinion. Write in the comments what you think. And if you like the video and want to support our work, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.